Big Pharma's Playbook. So before I go into that, I need to understand that the Western medicine system has its place. Like there is a place for drugs and surgery. It just, in no way, shape, or form, should be the go-to in all culture. In no way, shape, or form should we be a drug-first society. This should be a treatment that is further down the line. Doctors often get in this place because they're very well-meaning individuals. They truly want to help people, but they exist within a system that keeps customers on repeat. The system is incentivized to have repeat customers. Unfortunately, if people aren't sick, they're not in business. So taking a holistic approach to things as much as we can before we get to these treatments down the line. But in terms of the system itself, Big Pharma, there is a blatant lack of integrity there. The system is inherently flawed and was never designed to work in the first place. They have strategies that will go today that are in place to manipulate the public and the doctors and the data. The number one strategy here is detailing, which is the pharmaceutical companies, the reps, essentially giving incentives to the doctors to sell drugs. So they will do the research on the individual doctors and have them speak on certain lectures, give them gifts, and discussing it over a steak dinner. And of course, detailing results in the doctors prescribing more and more drugs. They often don't have time to read the research, so they rely on the sales reps to give them information. Number two is lobbying. Now, in 2020, pharmaceutical companies spent $306 million in lobbying. There were about 1,500 lobbyists in 2020, or about 63%, were actually government employees. Part of this was to keep drug prices high. Now, in no way, shape, or form should the government be paid by pharmaceutical companies to make decisions. Number three is marketing. Now, we have to keep in mind that there are only two countries in the world that actually allow commercials for pharmaceutical drugs. Of course, here and Switzerland. Now, this was illegal until the 70s. And Pharma spends most of its money on marketing as opposed to research, $7 billion back in 2020. So you got the drug commercial for like 30 seconds of benefits and then another 3 minutes of side effects. So let's get into some examples of fraud. So when research is submitted, only the summaries and manuscripts get submitted to these journals. The peer reviewers and editors don't actually get the real data. Now, this is exactly what happened with a drug called Vioxx. A study done in the Journal of New England Medicine showed that there was no cardiovascular risks with this drug, but eventually it turned out it was 2.5 times more likely that people would have a cardiovascular event who were on this drug. But that data was not published. The pharmaceutical company knew this data existed, but the journal and the doctors did not. By this time, this drug was taken off the market back in 2004, and 40,000 to 60,000 people died. So this is data from the pharmaceutical companies. And what do you think happened? No one went to jail. The drug distributor just had to pay a massive fine. The thing is that these fines are nothing to them because they get billions of dollars off the drug. It's just another cost of business, honestly. No one has ever gone to jail for drug trials. And this is part of the problem why it continues. Another example is statins. Now, the information, the trials is not given to the people who write the guidelines for them. There were 13 experts who wrote the guidelines for lowering cholesterol, of which 8 had ties to the industry. Part of the problem with the trials is that it focuses on the relative risk reduction, which is how the trials compare to one another, as opposed to the absolute risk reduction, which is the risk reduction for the actual individual itself. For statins, the relative risk reduction is about 20%, and the absolute risk reduction is about 3%, which means that it's only 3% effective at actually preventing cardiovascular events. Statins should really only be used by people in the high risk category, which is people who already had a heart attack or a stroke. The last example here is insulin. People who had insulin issues in the past used to be treated with pancreas extract, which had insulin in it for people with type 1 diabetes. Now, this was actually very effective. This was patented and only sold for $1 each. Now, this is the type of medicine that was for the betterment of the public. But then, in 1982, we genetically engineered insulin, and they claimed for it to be better than the past treatments, and was widely adopted. The problem is that there is no evidence for its effectiveness, and it costed 3 times more. Then we created insulin analogs, which again was not proven to be any more effective, but now costs $330 a bottle. Many of this is to incentivize to have higher drug prices. This is why it's so important to take back the power in our own hands and our own health, so we're not reliant on these systems that relies on the farming of sick people. If we're not sick, they're not in business. Again, it's primarily industry itself and not the doctors, but I'll be damned if I put my health in the hands of the industry rather than relying on nature, because nature is what we're made of. We're designed for health. Unfortunately, sickness is a norm in the culture, but it really should be the opposite. It's time to take our birthright back of health and wellness.